Hello everyone, welcome to the live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott. It is the 25th of February, isn't 2021 flying so fast? I hear you say, despite the joyous lockdown that we continue to find ourselves in around the world. I hope that you are all safe and well. I hope that many of you have started to be getting your perhaps vaccinations as well. I'm still waiting for the call up, but eager any day to head in. Here we are now also starting to look towards a roadmap to opening up again and getting out of lockdown. So all fingers crossed. And at the same time, the sun is starting to shine. I was able to have lunch outside for the first time in a long time yesterday, or a couple of days ago. It's the first good signs of spring, and a much better rest of the year is coming. Hello everyone, thank you so much for tuning in indeed. So we've had some absolutely fantastic questions coming from so many of you, as always. I'm going to try and get through as many as I can over the next half an hour or so. I do have one announcement though to begin with, that Claire has asked me, who of course you know Claire very kindly helps manage the Facebook page. Claire has said that people have been getting in touch saying they haven't been receiving notifications about posts and videos. So Facebook may have been changing its settings and playing around, but do check your notification settings at the top of your Facebook pages and make sure they are clicked to enable notifications for posts and videos, so that you know when we've been posting delicious, fantastic ancient worlds content for you, which of course includes pictures of slices of cake, a absolutely fantastic and delicious cake, I might add. And yes, I have eaten every slice of it that was going. So we have to kick off with some questions. There was one question that was asked live last time that I didn't get a chance to answer, that was called from Rebecca Louise. And I think we were talking particularly about the way that classics can be used and misused to mean and support different things. And particularly in the US, we've seen that documented by the Pharos website project that documents the misuse of ancient classical sources to justify modern day outright homophobic, xenophobic viewpoints. And Rebecca was responding to this, saying that she just read an article in the New Yorker by a scholar, classic scholar called Daniel Padilla-Peralta, who's at Princeton University, talking about the need to dismantle the discipline and asking for comments on this. And Rebecca, absolutely, this was a quite an interesting and kind of quite a contentious article from Daniel, talking about the need to really almost burn classics down as a discipline if it didn't want to modernize and actually recognize, first off, its own role in supporting very traditional colonial viewpoints and structures and ways of seeing the world. And this dates back actually quite some time to a movement to kind of decolonize the curriculum that's been gathering apace in classics around the world. I think my response to this is that we have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, of course, classics has to modernise. It has to think not only more keenly about how classics has been received and what has been done with classics, it also needs to be more honest and upfront about what classics has been used for in the past and what it's been used to support. And it also needs to be much more voracious going forward in actually thinking about classics as a discipline that makes fundamentally people question things. Right, this is what classics does better, I think, in some ways than any other subject, because of the broad range of different approaches that are within the staple of classics. It forces you to question and rethink and analyse everything you look at. And that value of classics, I think, is very much something that we want to keep with us and to keep flourishing through into the 20th century. I'm sounding old classicist myself, aren't I? Into the 21st century. So yeah, that would be my response, Rebecca, to that it's really important that we do go through this process of modernisation and rethinking and of honesty and self-reflection, but actually we also need to recognise the important value of what classics brings, champion that going forward into the future. One of the things that you may well notice, and you see this particularly in America already, is that the classics departments are actually changing their names, and they're moving away from calling themselves classics because of the connotations of that subject, and thinking about calling themselves centres for Mediterranean studies or ancient Mediterranean studies, getting away from that focus on two particular cultures, Greece and Rome, and incorporating the many different cultures from around the Mediterranean, but also getting away from that quite loaded term of classics. So we may well see, I think, that happen more here in the UK as well, or a move towards it calling it ancient history, for instance, as the Department of Warwick is called classics and ancient history. So Rebecca, thank you very much indeed for that question. Matt has been in question. Matt Whiffen has been in touch also asking questions about the ideas of rights as we understand them today. The modern world has a concept of human rights that apply to everyone regardless as they should. Can we speak of this type of human or personal rights in the ancient world? So this is another great question that really talks and goes to the heart of kind of modern versus ancient perceptions. And on the face of it, you might think there are continuities. So when people discuss ideas of freedom, of liberty, things that are considered to be universal human rights today, very often those discussions will, in the initial phases, be traced back to the origins of ancient concepts of liberty that many would see in that of ancient Greece and of ancient Athens and the origins of democracy. But the problem, I think, is here that kind of actually, the moment you start testing and prodding and pushing at those links, you find that they don't stand up particularly well, or at least are not connected via the iron threads we might hope for. Ancient concepts of liberty were much, much more limited to being relevant to a particular section of people, the people who deserved to have liberty. And that was always very much in contrast to a very much larger section of the ancient population that was not afforded that same liberty. So Athens, as a fundamental example, is a collection of, at max, 50,000 male adult citizens with all sorts of rights of freedom and liberty, living in amongst a population not only of women and children without those same citizen rights, but living on top of a much larger slave population that was working for them, that made the total population of Athens somewhere between about 200 and 400,000. In Sparta, there were supposedly 7 helot slaves for every 1 Spartan male citizen, for instance. So you can get the sense here of the very, very clear idea. There was no universal human rights to anything like liberty or freedom or equality in the ancient world as we would hope to have today. But of course, we also walk that walk. We talk that talk of universal human rights today. But of course, the sad reality is that is not the case on the ground in many parts of the world, and certainly in many cases closer to home than we might wish to admit. So thank you, Matt, very much indeed for that question. Lee saying you had a 12-year-old people asking this question in class this week about the story of Theseus. Yeah, really interesting. So many of the ancient mythological stories, actually, when you start to prod them with a modern mindset of ideas of freedom, liberty, justice, often these are things that not only were being made questions in the ancient world, but actually when you compare between the ancient and modern worlds, they become even more of a difficult question. So Matt, thank you very much indeed for that. Eric Tomlinson, you've been in touch as well, saying we really enjoy staying close by antiquities to spend much longer than the average tourist would. Rome, Athens, Corinth and Delphi are the obvious stars. During lockdown, you are trying to decide, Eric, on where you will next visit. I think so many of us are, aren't they? Where are we going to go next? Where are we going to go when we can go somewhere once again? Once we unlock, where would you suggest for a longer stay amongst the ancient world? Ooh, good question, Eric. Do send in your suggestions. Let us know what you think. Where would you suggest that Eric goes for a longer stay to really absorb and immerse himself in the ancient world? Well, so many good choices. But I think I would get a bit of time in Sicily. So Karen suggests Pompeii, stay near Pompeii. But I was just getting to Sicily. Pop yourself there, somewhere near Segesta, Salina, somewhere there on the south coast, and really just explore and range along that south coast of Sicily would be absolutely fabulous. If you're in Greece, then get down into the Peloponnese. Get away from kind of Athens, perhaps, for a little while. Get down into the Peloponnese. Go down to see places like Sparta, like the Temple of Apollo at Bassae, or Nemea, or Argos, somewhere a little bit off the beaten track. Or take yourself out to the islands. Who wouldn't want to go to the islands and spend a bit of time there exploring some of the major island sites? Like Paros is a fantastic island to go and see the ancient sites on. Baalbek, someone has suggested as well. Yeah, absolutely. If we can get out to Lebanon, that would be lovely. Go and spend a bit of time soaking up the ancient atmosphere. So there are tons and tons of choices. Do keep sending in your thoughts, and we can post them all on the Facebook page as a good suggestion of where we can all dream that we might start to go to. And Linda says Abydos, another great example. We've got time for a couple more questions before we break to have a look at what's going on in the news. So Mariam Zaidi, you have been asking this. What were the teaching methodologies in ancient Greece? How interesting. So how was teaching done? Well, it depended a little bit on who was your teacher, and that depended a little bit on your social and economic status. So you may, if you were of the lower status, be getting no education at all. So no teaching methodologies employed whatsoever. Or if you were a slightly higher status, then you may well be in some kind of group a teaching scenario, maybe a household slave teaching you, who had some rudimentary education, or if you were kind of from the higher echelons of society, you would have a very highly trained and educated pedagogos being your kind of personal teacher and responsible for your upbringing. And that would be not just in literature, if you like, and writing, etc., but it would be also looking after you and instructing you and overseeing your instruction in things like gymnastics, working out in the gymnasion, exercise, development of your martial skills, etc. So the teaching methodologies, we know that lots of recitation, lots of learning, lots of writing out, particularly of the great Homeric epics. We see that a number of times, people copying and working and absorbing these great works, as well as kind of musical instruction as well. That would be really very important and all part and parcel of it. But it would also be a code of living, right, that kind of was being imparted. So I guess one of the interesting things of teaching methodologies today is about the values. The ancient Greek tutor would be as interested in making sure that the child understood the values of what it meant to be a citizen of Athens or of Sparta or of Thebes or wherever they were growing up, as much as they actually knew subject matter and facts and things. And obviously the other side of the teaching methodology and the training that would be absolutely crucial would be rhetoric, oratory, the ability to communicate. These were oral societies in which actually your ability to speak and to persuade was one of the most powerful weapons in your arsenal. So that would be a very important part of the educational process as well. So Mariam, thank you very much indeed. Well, certainly they would not have been teaching, although there's some similarity between iPads of the modern day and kind of wax tablets of yesteryear. Certainly not through PowerPoint instruction, but much more in that kind of one-to-one focus of developing the whole. And I think that's where, in some ways, kind of modern educational curricula and teaching strategies could actually learn from the ancient world, that there was a real interest in developing the whole person, that sometimes I think we lose sight of a little bit in kind of modern teaching prioritizations. Okay, brilliant. I can't resist this before we go to the break. Linda Montague, you have been talking about misnomers throughout history. And the two you can think of are Caesarean section, wrongly attributed to Julius Caesar's birth, and the Vesper scooter, perhaps wrongly named after the Emperor Vespasian. Can you, or anyone on the Q&A, think of any more? So, absolutely, are there any things that come to your minds where you think of things that we use and talk about today, which have been wrongly misassociated with a particular ancient fact or personage or event? And there are two that spring to mind what you guys are thinking. One of which is always, I think, really surprising. And that is, where does the phrase, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, come from. And I spent a long time thinking that it was probably said by somebody one would imagine in Rome, but it wasn't. And actually, it's a phrase that comes from a much later period of the Roman Empire, so 4th century AD, after Rome has sort of the Christian populations of Rome have really started to develop after the end of the persecutions of the Christians, and it was actually said by the Christian bishop of Carthage in North Africa. And so he has one of his congregation comes to him and say, look, I've got this real problem, Bishop, that I was traveling to Rome for trade and business, and I turned up in Rome, and they just worship Christ in a totally different way to the way we do here in Carthage. And this was one of the real problems of early Christianity throughout the 4th century, in that there was actually a huge amount of variety in early Christian practice. And that was why under Constantine there were things like the Council of Nicaea to actually sit down and gather the kind of Christian leaders in one place and get them to hammer out and agree a whole set of things that everyone could then do and be if they considered themselves Christian. And prior to that, there was kind of a huge variety of practice and belief. And the bishop of Carthage at this point turns around to his member of his congregation and says, well, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Do it like the Romans do in Rome. And when you come back to Carthage, do it like the Carthaginians do it, etc. Kind of thing. There you go. So that's one that I always find quite surprising. But Linda, in terms of Vespasian, you have put me in mind of something which I would love to see if any French or Italian speakers are out there and can confirm whether or not this term is actually ever really used in day-to-day speak. Because there is a story that the Emperor Vespasian was the emperor who realized that one could collect and make some money off urine. Right? Because urine was actually a very valuable commodity in ancient Rome, and it was something that could be used in all the fulleries, the washeries, right, as an astringent to wash clothes. And he put up, and had put up around the city, a large number of public urinals, so that Romans could go and relieve themselves when needed, sort of in the street, and that urine could be collected and thus could then be sold, and the Roman state could make money off people's urine. Now, kind of famous, two things come out of this. One is that his son, who's absolutely disgusted by this, is going, oh God, kind of, how could you possibly make money, father, out of such a disgusting method? Is supposedly Vespasian turns around and famously says, money doesn't smell. Right? So money doesn't smell. We've got an Italian. Brilliant. Okay, so this is the question that's coming up. Money doesn't smell. It doesn't matter how you make it. Money is money. But as a result of that, as I understand it, in Italian and in French, one of the words you can use for a public urinal to this day, in Italian is a Vespasiani, and in French is a Vespasien. So you can actually call public urinals after the Roman Emperor Vespasian, who was the first to go about collecting urine in public. Now, any Italians or French out there, please do let me know if you have ever heard anyone call a public urinal a Vespasiani in Italian or a Vespasien in French. I'd be interested to know, but apparently that is a word that it does exist in the vocabulary. I would love to see anyone, and please do tell us if you do this at any point kind of over the next couple of weeks when we're allowed out, obviously out of lockdown. You can go out and find yourself a public urinal somewhere and declaim that you are off to use the Vespasians, not the public urinals indeed, but the Vespasians. There you go. Maybe we should start a whole new trend. Who knows what might happen. So Linda, thank you so much for that question. Do jot down and send us in to the Facebook page or via email to michaelscottacademic@gmail.com any thoughts that you have about other things which are misattributed to the ancient world, but kind of those are some of my favourites. Right, we must get on to some of the things that are going on around the world. So stuff that's been in the news, ruins of an ancient church and temple have been discovered in Egypt. So this is down at Shihar Fort in the Aswan Governorate in southern Egypt from the Ptolemaic period. So this is really interesting. We rarely find stuff of the Roman era necessarily kind of in Egypt, but the Roman fort and early Coptic church dating to around the time kind of the later Ptolemaic era. Absolutely brilliant. There has been also a Roman necropolis discovered in the Crimea. Absolutely kind of extraordinary to see the reach, this extraordinary reach of the Roman world. This is a brilliant one if you guys want to get involved, if you've got a little bit of time on your hands during lockdown. You want to help out the Center for Hellenic Studies in Washington, D.C., because they've got an open call for volunteers to help with their Open Greek and Latin project, the OGLP. Now, what they're trying to do is to digitize all the remaining literary texts from the first 1,000 years of Greece, right? And they've got 8 million words of Greek still to be digitized. And you too can get involved, so do have a look at that. All the links for this are on our Facebook page, so you can see it all there. In Turkey, there's a stash of 600 Roman-era silver coins dating towards the sort of end of the Republic and beginning of the Empire have been found. The gates of Cyrus the Great have been unearthed near Persepolis. Absolutely extraordinary. God, I would love to get to Persepolis, a place I've never been able to visit, and I would love to go. And of course, many of you will be familiar closer to home, and many of you may have seen the documentary with Alice Roberts recently on BBC Two, where the new discovery of the fact that Stonehenge, the stones were originally set up in Wales before being dragged 140 miles to Wiltshire to then be reset up in the Stonehenge that we know and love today. And this is a kind of absolutely extraordinary discoveries, both of the archaeology behind it and of the BBC Two documentary, which I hope you've been enjoying. And then, of course, in Athens, and we might come back to this question because there's been a question about restoration as well. They are about to start doing some restoration on the Temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens. And I always think this temple blows my mind. It was it's the largest Greek temple in Athens by far. And it was actually begun in the 6th century BCE by the Greek tyrant or Athenian tyrant Pisistratus, who really wanted supposedly to have massive public building projects going on that all the Athenian citizens could be involved in, so they wouldn't have time to complain or perhaps even to think about rebelling against his rule. But it was such a big conception of a temple that it was so big he couldn't actually bring it to fruition. Nor could anyone else. From the 6th century BCE right the way through to the 2nd century CE until the period of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, no Athenian democratic government or individual tyrant ruler could actually bring the necessary manpower, resources and material and money together to actually focus on completing the temple. It was so big. The Emperor Hadrian, however, with his love of Athens in the 2nd century CE, came along and finally finished off the temple that had been begun nearly 800 years before. Kind of absolutely extraordinary. What a temple history that is indeed. What's on? If we've got a chance to have a quick chat about what's on. So you may have had a chance to see me have a chat with Mary Beard on Inside Culture a week or two ago. That is still available on BBC iPlayer or indeed on YouTube. And you can also have a listen to me talking to Vic Minette on BBC Coventry and Warwickshire or radio about snakes and putting everyone off their lunch, talking about guinea worm disease and the ancient origins of the medical symbol of the snake wrapped around the staff. Coming up on the 3rd of March, Mary's talking about Roman emperors through a 19th century lens at a Classics for All event. This was a great fundraising event for Classics for All, important charity doing great work, helping extend the reach of classics into schools across the country. So do think about getting a ticket for that. There's also an evening with AC Grayling, the philosopher who the Classics for All are organising. That's going to be on the 11th of March, so you can get a ticket for that. Wednesday the 10th of March at WOW UK Festival, Bettany Hughes and Natalie Haynes will be in conversation talking about real stories of women from Greek myth, which would be absolutely brilliant. And the British School at Athens, if you are a school teacher in any form of classics, do consider the British School at Athens virtual course for school teachers. The British School at Athens is my home away from home in Greece. We can't be there right now, so they are going virtual, and they're doing a series of great lectures relating to a different number of themes that are all tied in with the GCSE classical civilization module, particularly the Homeric world. So if you teach that for any reason, get the absolutely cutting edge research and insights out from the BSA team, from the director downwards, who will be giving lectures as part of that virtual course. So do, and it's absolutely free, so get involved in that. Podcasts as well. The History Hit, I've got something about Jura Europos, the great city of Jura Europos. And of course, there's another BBC Two series unfolding over this couple of weeks with Nina Ramirez. We had the Minoans and the Palace of Minos Knossos last week, and then we're moving on, I think, to the Vikings this week as well. So do get involved with watching that series as well. Okay, so we've got a couple more minutes for questions. Helen Hagas says the French sports chain called Athlete's Foot. This is not a good name at all for a sports chain. You're absolutely right. We want to avoid any conception of that. That takes me back to the days of filming Invisible Rome underground, walking through the ancient sewer of Rome with a leaky Wellington boot and getting a rather nasty little fungal foot infection. Say that 3 times fast. And regretting that for several weeks afterwards. Carolyn Nicklin has been asking, the Q&A, along with other interesting podcasts and books, been great for your mental health during these lockdowns. I'm very glad to hear that, Carolyn. What did the ancient Greeks recommend for good mental health? Really interesting question, Carolyn. Thank you for this. We've touched upon this once or twice before, I think, when people have asked about kind of mental health attitudes. I think in this realm, the ancient Greeks really are a kind of... a moment where things change, right? Kind of in early ancient Greece, 6th through to middle and second half of the 5th century, what people often ascribe anything that they can't naturally explain to, and this would include kind of mental illnesses, to the gods, right? You have been afflicted by the gods, and the only way out of this is to pray and make sacrifices to the gods so that they will lift the affliction. But what you see from the late 5th century is really the beginnings of and the development of a medical tradition, i.e. that we as humans can actually treat a number of the physical and mental problems that we face using a whole series of techniques, tools and remedies that we still look back to in terms of our modern medical traditions today. And particularly we focus around a figure called Hippocrates, who was a late 5th century kind of Greek doctor. Of course, today we still have the Hippocratic Oath that is sworn by doctors. And one of those kind of sea change moments is a treatise that was written by Hippocrates called On the Sacred Disease. Now, from the description of what the sacred disease is in the text, we think this is probably epilepsy. In it, Hippocrates is arguing that actually this thing which had been hitherto called the sacred disease, i.e. something that was given and taken away by the gods, was actually something which could be treated and handled by humans as a physical human condition that could receive some kind of treatment. Particularly scholars like William Harris at Columbia have done quite a lot of work on this, and their focus increasingly after the end of the 5th century was on mental conditions which we would today describe as psychoses, so those which have kind of externalizing disorders or visible externalizing problems as a result of kind of mental difficulties. And they would then prescribe a whole series of different kinds of treatments, so kind of everything from kind of still occasionally prayer, sacrifice to the gods, all the way through to pharmaceutical treatments that they had concocted, as well as kind of course, exercise and kind of good diet and all of these things that, perhaps we might want to think a little bit more about now than we actually do. So Caroline, thank you very much indeed for that question. Have we got time for one more? Yes, we have. Okay, Alexis Brand, as we were talking about a number of documentaries that are being made at the moment and being shown around, and Alexis has asked about, we're enjoying watching all these TV programs. Well, these presenters talk engagingly about clambering over ruins, and they do it on boats tossed on the stormy seas, or they go down all sorts of places. And some do it in heels too. Yes, I noticed those heels too. Alexis from Nina walking around from Knossos. So my question is, how do you all manage to look so cool, spotlessly dust-free and professional? Not a bead of sweat, not a mozzie bite or a touch of sunburn in sight. Well, thank you, Alexis. I'm so glad that we I'm sure we'll all be very happy to know that you think that we all look like we don't have any bead of sweat or a mozzie bite or a touch of sunburn inside. Partly it is a kind of a desire to avoid those things because we presume that people don't want to see us sweating our guts out or covered in mozzie bites or burnt to a crisp. So kind of things, we do our best to avoid that. But it is an interesting process. And Alexi's question is kind of what's the reality of filming actually like? And the reality is you are out on long filming days from sort of first sunrise to sunset. So you're often out in the hot sun for long periods of time. You need to be prepared for that. So it's about factor 50 suntan cream all the way from start to finish. But you also need to dress appropriately so you know you're going to be able to keep cool even in the heat. Taking stuff with you that might be able to help in the time. You can't really wear sunglasses or a hat, or at least not a wide-brimmed hat when you're on camera because people want to be able to see your eyes without too much shadow over your eyes. So you might want to take some people have a sort of nice parasol umbrella, or you find the shade of a tree whenever you can. But I think the most important thing is just to kind of relax and enjoy and try and remember that it's a fabulous privilege to be in these wonderful places and get to talk about them and communicate them with people. But I will tell you in on one secret, which is that editors tend to like you to be wearing the same thing across the whole filming of the program, at least in sequences that will follow one another, because then when you edit them together, and you may have been filming them on different days and different places, they're easy to edit together and you don't have to explain suddenly I walk into one building and out of it in two different sets of clothes. So they want you to be wearing the same clothes. So then people ask, aren't you stinking to high heaven by the end of an hour-long program walking around 10 different sites, which must have taken you X number of days to do? Actually the secret there is just having multiple copies of the same piece of clothing, so you can have a fresh shirt without seeming like you've changed too much. There we go. There's the secret. And our time is out. I'm so sorry we haven't had a chance to get to so many of your great questions. But next time will be the 11th of March. So in 2 weeks' time, 11th of March, 5 p.m. I'll be here. I hope you guys can be too. And in the meantime, stay safe. I hope those homeschooling enjoy that last week or so of homeschooling, and roll on the 8th of March. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon. Bye.